somebody in your office who, if there's somebody in your office who hasn't signed up, make sure to tell them, or you can share it with them. It'll be on our YouTube channel. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, David Sulock. David is the Managing Director of Curren Environmental, and he has over 25 years of experience in the environmental services industry. His expertise includes phase 1, 2, and 3, environmental site assessments, as well as management of remedial investigations and actions related to mold, soil, and groundwater. He's been involved in environmental consulting and contracting projects such as mold surveys, subsurface investigations, groundwater mapping, environmental audits, and project audits. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks, David.
All right, people. I hope everyone's having a pretty good day. I hope I don't ruin it because we're talking about mold. It's a four-letter word that comes into your real estate transactions. And something interesting about mold is it typically takes most people by surprise, okay? Because if you're listing a house, you're not listing and advertising that there's mold growth in the attic and the crawl space and the basement. And I reference those three areas because those are the three most likely areas where it comes up. So it's something that's really taken by surprise by a seller for the most part because they're not really looking for it. And the buyer just knows that mold is a bad thing and they don't want to buy a house with mold. And so you get opposing reactions, okay? And this class is to give you some knowledge on it, okay? And one of the things I want you to start off just knowing, when people say there's a mold problem or it's mold contaminated, or it's basically you have a water problem. Water caused this, okay? It really helps lower people's fear because that's what caused it, okay? You fix the water issue, you fix the mold, it's not going to go back, okay? So in today's market, it's more popular than it was 30 years ago because trust me, houses have been sold with mold forever, okay? It's just more in the forefront, okay? Because people are looking for it, you know? Before people would call it mildew, okay? And guess what? Mold and mildew are the exact same thing. Mildew just sounds better, okay? I show this photo to you, that's a crawl space. No one's going in there, okay? And if you're going in there, you're going in there for something and you're getting out of there quick and you're not really observing and looking at everything, okay? Because when we find mold, and the owner's like, where is it? Or, buyer, the client. And it's like, they're looking, they don't really see it. And it's like, I got to shine the light a certain way. And they're like, oh, there it is. So a lot of times when you look at stuff straight on, you don't see it. This photo of the beam and everything, there's light hitting it and you can actually see the discoloration. I could show you a million pictures of mold that doesn't even look like mold. Okay. Um, Pennsylvania just doesn't really have this, but New Jersey does, and other states doing it or do it. Today is Thursday. I'm actually going to Orlando on Sunday to teach at a convention for home inspectors, and one of the topics is mold. Okay. And the thing is that some states have disclosures. Okay. That if you know about water or mold, you're supposed to disclose that. At some point, Pennsylvania might get it. New Jersey got it last year. And I say this to you because it's something that's listed on there. And I will tell you, matter of factly, when somebody sees that there's a water, this and that, they want to have someone in and take a look at it. So even if the people are being completely honest that they had this, they had it addressed, I wind up getting a phone call, or a similar company gets a phone call because they want it professionally evaluated. Okay. But I say this to you because I like to show photos that are very indicative of things. People tell me I'm afraid about mold being everywhere. This is a photo of mold above a shower. Okay. You notice it's only growing in this one area. Okay. Why? Because that's where it's most moist. Okay. That's where it's growing. It's not growing outside of there because it's not wet enough for that. So when people are afraid about it spreading through the house, it's very unlikely. This mold in this crawl space, people were concerned that it was going to be upstairs. People were buying the house. We tested upstairs. It was fine. It was a normal fungal ecology. Did I test the crawl space? No. You're not living in the crawl space, so I'm sure the levels would be screaming high, and it's not a very realistic aspect to it. Okay. This is an attic. Okay. Now, this is an attic. You're looking up at the attic. Okay. And that's the A-frame. A lot of people don't look up. A lot of attics are very dark. They might have a light bulb that may work or may not, may have planking, may not. In these circumstances, you have this. I mean, that attic mold is typically caused from poor ventilation. It could be a sign that the roof is failing, or it was failing and they put another layer on and they never addressed the mold. All right. I'd like to give you some comparisons to like different states. Okay. And it's in my mindset because I got to teach all these people from all over the country over the weekend. And it's like you can't really keep track of everything. There's 11 states that have mold regulations. Okay. Pennsylvania doesn't have them. New Jersey, Delaware does not. New York is the only one. Okay. So in New Jersey, for example, if you disclose that there's mold, all you have to do is give them this mold guidelines. It's a little booklet, okay, that says what to do, how to handle it, how to get multiple quotes, like that it's a water issue. It doesn't say like, oh, test it for toxicity, test it for, is it black mold? Is it going to get me sick? It doesn't say anything like that. Okay, it says it definitely is a health hazard. So, for example, I just told you this. This was a disclosure someone had. We painted the basement block wall floors with dry lock. There's never been a presence of mold that we are aware of. This in relation to, was there any kind of dampness or water seepage? Because of this, our client was really, really concerned about doing it. Looking at it, there really was no concern. We tested it, we saw it, it was fine, but it triggered something in their mind, okay? And some people are like that, some people aren't, okay? And it's a matter of keeping a level head. Conversely, we have a home inspector inspecting a house, and this is the basement. They obviously had some issue on this wall and they fixed it. And the buyer wants to know, well, what is that? Okay. And it's like, is there a crack in the foundation? Because trust me, I open up walls, there's a crack in the foundation, they didn't seal it. Was it the window that was leaking? It wasn't the window because the window was higher up. There was actually the cement outside was sloping towards the house, and it was coming in the wall there. And what they actually did was they injected, you can drill holes and inject foam, and it's really cool. Instead of breaking up the concrete, and will raise the concrete up to adjust the grade. But they were concerned by this. Okay. Here's another example of a property that was having a water issue, and we happen to go there on a rainy day, and you can see the photo to the right. All this water is sitting in this planting bed, and they have the brick pavers that are stopping it. The photo to the left, you can see how the water is being discharged through there, okay? Well, I will tell you the photo to the right, water sits there next to the foundation. And I don't care if you have a membrane on the foundation wall on the outside. If there's a pinhole somewhere, that water's going to push against it and find its way in. Okay. Um, how to resolve this is actually taking rid of those bricks and adjusting the grade so the water flows away from it. And as well as they had issues with the gutters on this property. But they had a mold issue in the basement, and it just so happens we inspected on a rainy day, and it was pretty obvious that that's where it was coming from. This is an attic. The photo to the left, you can't see it any longer, but right where you see that where the mold growth is, it was a exhaust vent to a bathroom. It was the parents, it was their daughter's bathroom, and whenever the exhaust fan was put in, it did not vent to the outside, it vented there. A key thing about anyone inspecting for mold or referencing mold is, where do you see it? How big of an area it is? In this circumstance, I was told there was mold in the attic, right? And I'm like, okay, is it throughout the attic or is it, isolated? In this circumstance, it was in one isolated area because it was just perfect conditions for the exhaust fan that one person, their daughter, was using the bathroom. So that's what it created. Now, the photo to the right was really they insulated the attic and they covered up the eaves. It was building up moisture because you wanted the airflow to go, and it was really spread throughout the actually attic. The whole attic had this mold growth on it because it was a buildup over time, and it was a DIY cause because someone decided to go to Lowe's or Home Depot, buy insulation on a weekend, go up there and spread the insulation, and they think more is better, and they cover everything, not realizing you're not supposed to cover the airflow, the eaves that come up. I say this because one of the ways that you could really help manage mold in a transaction, um, for buyers or sellers, is determining the cause. And I'm not saying you're going to determine the cause. I'm saying whoever gets involved should be able to determine the cause because you want to make sure that cause is fixed. It's no longer there. So when the mold is addressed, it's addressed. And they will see that it's a very good reason why it occurred. Because people are like, well, Dave, it's in the attic. It could be in the bedrooms. I'm like, it's not. It's a totally different environment upstairs. Okay. Same thing with the basement. I show this to you because mold is all different colors. And you'll see a cobweb going across there. You might find a property has termites, right? Termites like moisture. So does mold. So do insects, right? So a lot of times you'll find them all hanging out together. You might find termite damage, you might find mold, and you might find some insects. You might have ants and everything because of it. So I share this to you because it's not always the same. And something you should know, okay? No such thing as toxic mold. There's no such thing as black mold. I'm going to tell you why in a couple minutes, but I say this to you because people misrepresent themselves on these things, okay? And people always tell me, is this mold going to get me sick? I can't tell you if it's going to get you sick or not. I can tell you that if you've an allergy to gluten or cheese and you consume that, it will get you sick. And the same thing can go for molds. The person living in a home that has mold, that is disgusting looking or whatever, and they're not being affected, it's not bothering them. They're just, they have an immunity to it. Okay. Whereas someone might be more hypersensitive, they can move in and they may not get sick right away. Might not be a week, could be months later, but it can affect them because it can beat down their immune system. And I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. This is a basement. There's mold on the basement wall because it's a floating slab. Okay. A floating slab means the concrete, the floor does not go all the way to the wall. There's hydrostatic pressure. Water will come into the wall. So what happens is there's moisture below the slab and it vents up and it impacts the wall there and you get mold growth. We do work for a lot of new home builders. Okay. And typically they might do a development of say 26 homes, 45 homes, whatever. How we start doing a lot of work at these developments is you or as a buyer or one of your clients, I hope you could represent them, would go in and be like, I want to bring my designer in or my security consultant in to put the cameras and talk about this. And they look up and they see mold in the dining room. Like that's a dining room right there, right? And it's like, what? And we want to have it tested. I'm like, dude, it's 100% that's mold. Why is it mold? In new homes, the wood sits exposed outside because the wood gets dropped on like dirt. Even on a driveway, it gets rained on. Okay. You construct it in the house is not heated or cooled. It's subject to temperature extremes, so you can get growth um, occurring on it. If this wasn't picked up, it would have been sheetrocked over. Okay. How you can find it is typically like in attics because they're typically not completely sheetrocked, or in the basement. And even if the basement is completely sheetrocked, there might be rooms like the utility room and another room that's not completely the ceiling's not done. I told you before, mold and mildew are the same thing. They're both fungi. Mildew just sounds better. So when you might say that's mildew, I'd say it's also mold. Okay. Now your client, a seller, is going to be like, oh, they found mold. Mold is everywhere. This is what they mean when they say mold is everywhere, and they don't even know it. If there wasn't mold in that photo, the leaves, the grass, the mulch would never break down. No biodegradation. Okay. Everything would build up. So of course there's molds outside to do that. That's how it occurs. So when they say mold is everywhere, it is. But guess what? I walk through that yard. I walk into the house. I'm bringing some of those spores with me. I open a window. So when mold is everywhere, that's the mold that comes inside your house is coming from the outside. Okay. So you're technically not really having it grow in the house. Could you have mold growing in the bathroom? Of course. Okay. It's because you're not using your fan enough and it's getting very wet in there. I kind of typically write off bathrooms because it's just too moist of an environment. Now, if you have mold growing in a bedroom, I'd be a little more concerned because that's telling me you have a moisture problem. Not using your fan in the bathroom is typically your cause of mold growth in a bathroom. The photo to the left is actually one of the weathercasters on one of the three major channels in Philadelphia. That was their house. They were, cleaning. They pulled it up and they saw it. They were disgusted. They got in touch with us. I'm like, are people getting sick? They're not getting sick. I'm like, it's right by a window. The window's not completely sealed. Okay. It's summertime, so it's not locked. So warm air comes through, which I can show them with a camera, infrared camera, and they hit the cool vent for the AC, drops out moisture, and you get mold growth. Now, mold only grows on organic matter. Okay. Now, that is a metal vent. Why is it growing on there? Because there's dust on there. Same thing to the photo to the right. There's dust that builds up on there, and the dust is really it's skin cells. So it lands on there, it gets moist, and you get mold growth. So going back into a transaction, what happens when you observe fungi? So now I'm jumping from mildew to mold to fungi, right? The seller wishes you didn't see anything, okay? The seller's realtor wants to know what it's going to take to address it typically. Um, And you're also hoping that the buyers aren't going to pick up on it because they it was there. Okay. It didn't just happen. So you hope it's going to go away. And I say this because I deal with everybody. And that's what I hear. And typically the seller's like, this is crazy. It's not affecting me. Why do I care? It's a very, very common response. And the issue is, as I said earlier, that although you're not being affected by it, the people moving in can be. It's not a selling feature. We didn't advertise it. And quite frankly, ethically, if these people walk away from the sale, you're supposed to disclose that to the new buyer. And even if they don't, right? I advise people when you see a listing, it's under contract and it's not under contract, contact the buyer's realtor. What happened? Was there some major thing? Oh, there was a mold issue, or there was a foundation. Like it's not like it's a closed environment. There's information out there regarding this, okay? Because sellers be like, just find me somebody else. And it's like, well, should we just start advertising there's mold? Which of course you don't want to do, right? So the problem is there's misinformation. Okay, people say is there good and bad mold. I'd say the good mold is the mold that doesn't get you sick, right? The bad mold is the one that does. Okay, if you really want to break it down that way. Okay, um, oftentimes a home inspector will go through a property, see something, and it's not normal as part of their normal inspection. It's an add-on inspection that they can do if they've taken a class and they have some training in it. But typically what they wind up doing is they see something discolored, they test it, and it's like, it's mold. And you're like, okay. And then they walk away. And all you know is it's mold. And it's like, it really stirs the pot even more. And that's one of the things I'm going to be telling these people this weekend is the fact that you kind of have to go the step further so they understand that if you tested something that was stained and was not mold, right? You might say, well, what is it? I don't know what it is, right? But it's not mold. Wonderful. No problem. But when you confirm that it's mold, it opens up a situation where it has to be professionally evaluated to figure out what caused and what the extent of it is. All right. People talk about toxic mold, black molds, right? Um, there's no such thing. There's molds that produce something called a mycotoxin. It's a byproduct of mold growth. Okay. So when you type in like black mold, okay, you'll get stuff black mold exposure, right? So most all molds have a Latin name to them. They're very hard to pronounce. Okay. This is a list of molds, and I have some B's in there, right? If you look at this list in all seriousness, okay, is there any type of mold that's easy to pronounce besides schmutz? There really isn't, okay? So when people say black mold, I say, well, that's really made up by the media. It's not really a type of mold because they're all scientifically based. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, are you afraid about yellow mold or white mold or pink mold or gray mold or brown mold? Molds aren't named after a color. And let me tell you, I wish they were because it'd be so much easier to pronounce. These are some other molds, right? Again, if you look at it, you're like, oh my God, what? How do I pronounce these, right? Yeah. So the concerns with mold are real because you have a moisture issue, but there's the health concerns. So people can get sick. I'm not saying the occupants of the home are getting sick because obviously they're living there, but there's a repair that has to be possibly be made to prevent the moisture, or maybe it has been repaired, right? So if you want to say does mold cause health problems, okay, this is from the EPA. Okay, EPA is the federal environmental agency across the United States. They produce allergens. They potentially produce toxic substances, which they're saying mycotoxins. I put this in yellow for you. So by inhaling, touching them, your body can have an autoimmune reaction to it, similar to allergies. Okay, and yes, you can have skin irritation, eyes watering, any number of things. Okay. So what happens is that's what a mold spore looks like under a microscope, bottom left. You inhale it and your body's like, oh, I don't really like that. Okay. So that's how, look, I had a couple who were, we found mold in the basement and they moved exercise equipment down there and they're like, we're getting sick, but we're exercising. And I'm like, well, there's mold here and you're exercising on the bike, on the treadmill. So you're breathing all this in. And of course it's affecting you. It didn't really come to them. And if you looked at it, you will look at the ceiling and be like, that just doesn't really look like mold, but it actually was. Okay. Mold is considered a bioaerosol. It's a biological air contaminant. Okay. And there's people who have lived in homes with mold, gets into their lungs, and it stays in their lungs. Years later, they're tested, mold's growing in your lung because your lung is organic. Okay. So I just told you a couple scary things about mold. Now I'm going to tell you something kind of disgusting, but kind of very informative. You flush a toilet, right? You don't put a lid down. 2.8 seconds, you get that. 4 seconds, 6.4, you get that. Okay. I show this to you because that's kind of how mold grows. If I'm mold right here, I'm going to grow in this little contained area. I'm not going 10 feet away. Okay. I'm not going upstairs. I'm going right where the environment is. If the whole area is very moist, has a similar condition, sure, it will grow. But it's typically not going to jump levels to another floor. Okay. Molds do a wonderful job of breaking things down in the environment. They're actually really great with cheese. They make cheese better. Okay. But it breaks it down, and when it's breaking something down, it off gases, which is the musty odor you smell. So when you smell a musty odor, it signifies that mold growth is active. If you went into a basement today and you saw mold and you didn't smell anything, it just tells you that the temperature is not conducive for it to grow. It's dormant. All right. On a long-term scale, mold can degrade wood. It'll break it down. But really, that's when the wood really gets wet. I find that mold treats wood as a buffet and kind of grazes across it. All right. This is a new construction home on the left-hand side. The HVAC people were coming in to put the vents in, and there was mold growth because water was sitting in there. And instead of them pumping it out, you're right, they put a fan in there and just spread the moisture so all the wood equally absorbs it, so it allows the mold to grow. The photo to your right is there's bad. So there's a corner of the house. Obviously, there was a bush there. They dug up the bush. There's a hole. A gutter drops water there. The wall gets wet. You get mold growth. All right. I show this to you because it's helpful to know where it's coming from because it's most helpful really for the buyer because they're going to feel better about it. And you can kind of say the seller was foolish. They missed this. They weren't paying attention. But once it's addressed and the cause is remedied, you're going to be the new homeowner. You're not going to be so foolish as to make this happen. So here's a scenario. Home inspector finds mold. Okay. You have to understand that in the table of contents of what they look for, that's everything they're looking for. Technically, if they went through everything and they opened up a closet door and they found a meth lab, they're supposed to comment on that. Okay. Because if they see something, they're supposed to comment on it. Okay. Even though it's not part of their procedure of what they need to do. Now, granted, they might have some training in it and they might be like, oh, that's mold, but typically they'll say it's fungal like or it's mold like because they like to keep it somewhat gray, right? This inspector said they recommend further investigation because the photo to the left, just so you know, that's an attic. If you ever see an attic or a basement or a crawl space that's white, it tells me that they actually had mold remediation done. Okay. Or there was a fire. Okay. In this circumstance, part of the attic had that, part didn't. The inspector saw that and they say further investigation because again, it's not part of the home inspector's core business to be investigating this. Okay. Here's another one from a home inspector. They took a sample from the basement, right? They're saying there's moisture issues. They should be corrected. Hire a qualified contractor. And if the affected area should be abrasively cleaned and treated with an antifungal coating. Okay. That's what the mold looked like. Now, what don't they say is that it was maybe 6 linear feet or 204. Like they don't really specify how big of an area. They just say it's there, and it tends to get people concerned. And many times, if you've seen it in a basement ceiling, it's throughout. There's also times where it's confined to an area because it's above the sub pump. The sub pump doesn't have a lid on it. A lot don't. And moisture comes up and it gets wet right there. Or there's some heating ducts that are not completely sealed and they're losing some air and that's causing it to happen. Okay. 10 times out of 10, home inspection, they reference mold, they're going to say you need a professional evaluation. Okay. And they're somewhat passing the buck, but they weren't hired for it. Okay. And even if you do hire them as an add-on, okay, it's typically they'll look for it and they'll test for it, and they'll be like, we don't remediate it. So they're basically quantifying a problem for you. Okay. I show this to you as another thing because consumer affairs, that's what they're supposed to inspect. Okay. Again, roofing, exterior garage, nothing really says about like mold, okay, or environmental hazards. Okay. So the funny thing about mold is sellers think their house looks like that. That is my daughter to the right giving me the finger. That is the Biltmore Mansion in Asheville, North Carolina. The house looks like that, right? But it doesn't because it's a used house. And I tell everybody, and the exception of new home buyers, is you're buying a used home. You're going to find some issues. And some of the issues the owners know about, some they don't. And some you live with. I'm sure if I went into any of your houses, I would find some things that maybe need a touch up or some adjustment, which you live with, right? These are all things that popped up in home inspections, okay? The bottom left, I showed you it's a floating slab. There's mold growth there. Could they have painted that before they listed it? Sure. The bottom right one, that is right by the HVAC system, right? There's mold growth there. That's an attic to the left. That's actually a garage to the right. Um, this is actually a new home where they've sheetrocked the basement on the right-hand side there, but the electricity is not on, it's not heated or cooled, and it's moist down there, and it was summertime, and they're getting mold growth on the new sheetrock. And the sheetrock had been painted, but you can see the wall is kind of like a cream, and the trim is white. So let's go into like post mold discovery, right? You find mold, okay? Whoever found it, I'd ask, do you know how big it is and where it came from? You know, they're going to say, maybe they do know. Okay. They might say, I really don't know. I just saw it. It was there. It needs further evaluation. Now, keep in mind too, your home inspector, I have to look at all these things in the house, right? And I see some mold in the attic. I'm like, am I going to be like a spider monkey going around every beam and looking for everything? Probably not. Okay. So that's why they leave it and kind of punt it. Okay. I kind of gave the explanation of why the mold was in the photo to the left, right? The photo to the right is a similar example of what I gave you earlier. You can see how that insulation is pushed. It's even with all the eaves there, and it's going up against the wall, stopping the moisture and getting mold growth. Okay. Now there are sites where people say it's mold, and it's not. The photo to the left is a garage. That is not mold. Apparently the parent's son washed the car in the garage and the hose hit the ceiling. I've also seen it in garages where there's striping like this because someone is spraying an insecticide to kill like a wasp, right? The photo to the right, that absolutely is mold, okay? If you're not 100% sure if something is mold and you want to do like a Hail Mary, like that photo right there, you're like, is that mold? You basically take a tape sample of it, it goes to a lab, they look at it under a microscope, and they can tell you it's mold growth. I will tell you that actually was mold growth in that photo. The photo here, the wood wall itself, the particle, typically is lighter in color. Okay. Home inspector flagged it out as being mold, didn't test it. I was 50-50 on it. I tested it, and actually it wasn't mold. It's just the color of it. Okay. This is in a basement, and there's this discoloration on there. What that actually is, there's two valves up there, and they're leaking. They're hot water valves, and they leak, and they're causing that. Valves leak. Okay. That was mold, but the mold was caused by a leaky valve, right? So in the industry, there's no licensing, okay? Um, you're going to look and see people do, I'm going to do a free mold inspection. I will tell you, the free mold inspection wants to find a problem, okay? Um, you're going to find if you hire someone for a professional opinion, you're going to get a professional result, okay? Um, and it's kind of important to differentiate because people are like, well, why should I look at this? Well, let me tell you something. I do a lot of inspections. I've been doing this a long time. And I've had people who've had mold remediation done and the mold came back. And they're like, how could that be? I'm like, well, you didn't fix the moisture issue. And there could have been three moisture issues. And I said, do you have any paperwork? Okay. And something I haven't said up to this point is if you're selling a house that actually had some mold work done, I would gather up the paperwork. Okay. So you have something paid invoices to be like, oh my God, you spent all this money. It's definitely going to have a seller or a buyer feel better. In this basement, they obviously have a water issue. You notice the wall on the right-hand side, That's called spalling. There's moisture on that wall from the outside, and the concrete is coming off. It's called spalling. Now, you've all seen little white dust like you make snow people with on a basement wall. That's calcification. It means there's actually moisture in the wall from the outside, and the calcium is leaching out of the wall. Technically, you want to break it down on a molecular level, the wall is degrading itself because it's losing calcium, it's breaking down. Is it going to break down in our lifetime? I don't know. But it's, to me, when I see calcification, it's a warning sign that you have moisture on the outside that's trying to work its way in. Okay. This basement was nice because they actually put a lid on there. All right. This attic had mold on the right-hand side of the photos. Okay. It was the north side of the house. There were trees covering it, and you can see all those little black dots on the planking right there. That right to the where the dividing line between that is the A-frame of the house. You can see it right there, right? Well, what happens is you get moisture on this side, and you have nail holes. The nails grab moisture, and the nail holes drop moisture, and you're getting that mold growth there. And there's actually mold on the ceiling as well. All right. What was the solution for that? Was better ventilation in this attic. You could spend money to take down those trees, which I'm not a big fan of, but it needed better ventilation. It didn't have a ridge vent to it, you know. Uh, this photo right here, clearly water was coming into the house, okay, because it's on the rug. There was a sofa behind there, and it's coming up on the woodwork. These are circumstances, and quite frankly, I don't know what to say, okay, because the seller knew it and didn't really care, and it's something pretty obvious for the people to find out, and they're saying we don't really have a water issue. Oh, I'm sure you did. There was definitely an odor down there. They actually had those little plug-in scent things running in the basement, which is always a warning sign to me. When I tell you it's valuable to get the paperwork regarding if mold work was done, okay, this basement right here, or this actually a crawl space, that white coating you see on there is a fungostatic coating. It means that mold should not grow on it. The better ones, there's two companies out there that make them, they last 10 years. There's warranties for 10 years. And I'll tell you, if someone warranties it for 10 years, it should last a lifetime. In this circumstance, it was failing, okay? The reason it was failing is because they never fixed the water issue in the crawl space. Case in point, that's the access to the crawl space. Definitely not airtight, not watertight. That's a piece of insulating material there. That is the vent to the crawl space. That is the exhaust going outside, right? And obviously moisture coming in. And they actually had a vapor barrier on the floor in there, and they had this blue water. You're like, what's that blue water? There's actually a very good reason why that's there, but I'm not going to tell you. Um, um, you can get it from copper and such, but I point this out to you because these people had this mold work done, and they hired us to come in because they wanted to sue the company who, or have them come back and do it under the warranty. And the manufacturer wouldn't do it. And we looked at it and said, you have such a high moist environment down here, you never fix any of this. And they're like, well, how do you know we didn't do it? I'm like, can I see your home inspection? You see the home inspection references moisture issues, references this stuff that they didn't address. So if you were going to like a fighting match, I was like, circle back to the original home inspection from when they purchased the property. This is another home that had mold remediation done. Again, the attic is white, but you see discoloration. There's mold growing on it. You're going to ask why. Again, the insulation was blocking the vents, but additionally, there was a skylight there, right? That skylight was in a bathroom. So it was a skylight in a bathroom. It was kind of cool. That's a skylight. Hold on, right to the right there. I'm sorry. And if you looked up close to it, you can see all the moisture from the bathroom going up there and getting in there, and it was working its way into the attic. And you're like, well, Dave, where's the exhaust fan? The exhaust fan was about 6 feet lower than the skylight in the side of the wall. So unless all the moisture was able to go right to the exhaust fan, it was all going up and into the attic. That was our thing. The guy actually emailed us. He had 3 roofers come out. They all said, you got to replace the roof. And you have to fix the skylight and the ventilation, which is exactly what we told them. But we don't do that, but I'm glad they justified it for him, right? And that's the attic as well. And you can see there's mold remediation done because it's white. You can also see how there's a white film on the top of the yellow fiberglass. Okay, so looking at that, I know that Someone insulated it, over insulated it, kind of screwed it up, and of course they're getting something from the skylight. It was a perfect storm, quite frankly. Okay. Additionally, have you ever seen like black dots landing on things? It tells you there's moisture in there, hot and cold mixing, and the nail holes dropping out. Like if you ever look in an attic, you'll see a bunch of black dots on the wood sheeting. Roofers call those cat eyes, when it's actually mold. That and the mold is just forming from the where the nails are and the moisture is hitting. That is a piece of wood on a hatch into an attic. It's a very thin piece of wood, right? So in the wintertime, you have hot air coming up, mixing with whatever air is up there. If it has moisture, it will drop it out. So they were getting mold growth on this piece of wood. If you go up in the attic, you would see more mold growth. The solution for this would be they actually have like thermal covers you can put up there that will block the air from coming up, or putting like some foam board on the back of that to stop the air from going up there. Mold doesn't really like wallpaper, but it does like the glue that holds the wallpaper there. If you ever see bubbles open up in wallpaper, it's mold growing. It's kind of off gassing, and we pull down and you see it right there. They actually had a hole in the siding, like it from like maybe a baseball or something. Water would get in there, the wall would get wet, and they had mold growth. And think about it. If you have like a dent or something in the siding, do you really look at it to be like, is there a penetration in it? And when it rains, for the most part, it's not going to hit it. But if the rain is driving against the house, it's going to find that opening and get behind the wall. So how do we check for mold? You basically, when I do it, I walk around the house and get a handle on where things are, how the sun's hitting it, how the slope is, the grade. And then we look around and we look for common areas. Like whatever, like I would expect a wall in a bedroom to have mold on it. If it connects to a bathroom, there's a water leak in the bathroom. If you have two bedrooms together and there's mold between the walls and there's no plumbing, it's like, well, there might be an HVAC duct there. Okay. There might be a leak from the ceiling. I have to find a way for moisture for it to occur. Okay. A lot of it is visual. We do have these really cool thermal imaging cameras, like this one right here. This was actually at a house down the shore. And you go around and you see purple, which means there's a temperature change, moisture. I went up there and I touched the sheetrock and my finger went right through there. There was it had corroded the drain in the bathtub, the U-joint, and had been leaking. Same thing here. You see on the left, it's kind of, and they're tough. These are all real photos. That painted brick wall was having the paint come off the brick. And they're like, why is that? They're like, oh, they didn't do enough surface prep. Well, there was moisture inside the brick and it was kicking off the paint because it couldn't hold. That thermal image right there, you could see that. I go and look around a house and I'm like, okay, that is a hatch into a crawl space. You see mulch, but you also see some stone right there. That tells me that the gutters are overflowing, dropping water right next to the house, allowing moisture to come into the house. I look at this and I say, there's obviously a high water table. That's why they put this trench drain in. But clearly there's some moisture on the yellow wall, but it's also forming on the white wall. So there's situations outside that cause it. Okay. You go into this crawl space, right? I see rust forming on the ductwork there. That tells me there's a moisture issue there. Okay. Air's leaking. So you think about that in the summertime, it's kind of cool, or the humidity could be in that crawl space. You're sending cool air. Cool air can meet some humid air because it's summertime. It drops out moisture and you get it. And you're like, how often does that happen, Dave? I said, it happens all summer long, every summer, until it builds up and you get this layer of mold growth. This is an attic where they spray foamed it, but you have the end of the beams and you can see there's some mold growth on there. Okay. I show these to you because some of these are kind of like, that's a driving sign, that like a cause to it. Okay. And I say it on behalf of sellers that they're not really looking for it. It's not really affecting them. So although that mold might grow every day or every other day, it may not grow long enough that it builds up that you have a musty odor. I will assure you, if you have a basement and it's musty, it's a lot more active. It's a lot more growing. Okay. Now you look at this photo right here, that's PVC pipe, and there's mold growing on top of it. It's growing on top because there's dust on it, it's your skin cells, and there's mold growing on the top. I say it to you because we do find mold, and I'm like, that's a de minimis quantity of mold. You can wipe that off and clean it yourself, and maybe if you kept the dehumidifier in the basement, that would stop it from coming back. This is actually a crawl space that Curren Environmental did. We did the ceiling, right? It was being sold, and the inspector found mold growth, right? The mold growth was on this insulated duct. And I said, the duct is the reason you're getting mold growth on there, and that's not treated with a fungostatic coating, it was a ceiling, is because you can see the yellow insulation there. Well, there's a gap there. So air is leaking out, hitting moisture, causing the mold growth to occur. The solution is ripping out that insulation and redoing it, which is it's a pain in the butt job to do because someone has to go into the crawl space to do that. But that was really kind of a low quality insulation. The better ones have the metallic backing to them. This was not mold. I'll give you a simple tip. If you question something's mold, take your finger, rub it on there. Don't go against the grain. If it comes off, it could very well be mold. If it doesn't come off, it could be paint. It could be plaster. Some older homes, they actually use the forms to like pour concrete or the foundation. Then they use them for the ceiling. Okay. This home clearly has a water issue because they have a dehumidifier on bricks, which tells me it gets wet. And some of the tiles popped up from water issue. I say this because you find mold in there and people are living with it. And it's like, you could have done something to fix it. Like, there's no law stopping any homeowner from fixing their own mold in the tri-state area. They absolutely can do it, but they don't really view it as an issue, or it's not really inclined to do. They may not be physically able to do it. You see this, and it's like, well, there's mold in the other room there. I'm like, why? I'm like, you're getting water issues. It's clearly coming up. That's why in my heart, I really feel like most states are going to adopt some sort of disclosure regarding water entry and such. And I know this much. The longer someone lives in a house, the more likely there was a water issue at some point in time. I've done a lot of surveys for people for indoor health, and you ask them how long have you lived there, and if you ever had any water issues, they'll be like, "Oh, I've had water issues. I've raised 3 kids." Right now, you deal with a seller. Oh, I've lived here 30 years, never had a drop of water. It's kind of questionable, right? Indications of mold growth, which I just kind of pointed out to you. Areas where moisture be coming in, you're picking up these odors, right? Here's the simplest thing, right? In your transaction, and either side can do it. Hire someone to assess the mold, get a quote. So it's not like an unknown. Now it carries a cost. Is it $1,000? Is it $5,000? Is it $3,000? It takes the hysteria of like, I'm going to die. I'm getting sick. Figure out the cost. We all hate the unknown. We want to know what things are going to be. Okay. If you're going to hire someone to do mold remediation, obviously you want to protect whoever's living there. It's contaminant control, containment, prevention. Like before you send someone in this room, you want to make sure that they're protected. They have N95 masks. We use them long before like COVID. Okay. And a lot of times, mold remediation is the demolition of like finished spaces. And that's what is occurring right here. The photo to the left, that was the ceiling. There was a water issue down there. The rug got wet. Afterwards, everything kind of gets treated. It gets deconstructed. So someone has to come back in and reconstruct the space, right? Ceilings and the walls, right? I showed you a bunch of like different types of mold sports earlier. This is kind of boring. You probably think everything was boring up to this point in time, but it's kind of boring. Cladosporium is ubiquitous. If you find that inside, it's coming from the outside somewhere. If you're allergic to that, you probably can't leave the house. Basidiospore is the same way. You may have firewood. Chitonium, it shouldn't be growing in your house. You have a water leak that's leaking every day because that mold will not grow. It's not wet every day. Stachybotrys is the same thing. Baconia, schmutz, again, leaves. You do some gardening outside. Those levels are going to be higher in the fall when you're doing stuff outside coming in. The leaves are breaking down, right? Not so much right now in winter. It is winter. This webinar is going on in February. Aspergillus penicillium is probably the one that you're going to see the most in your transactions because it really likes to grow in a house, likes to grow on wood, paper, and things. Okay. Mold remediation follows asbestos guidelines technically. If you're remediating a space, you should put plastic up to separate the space from somewhere else. You should run air filters, which is like a large N95 mask that filters the air. It cleans it, right? Um, when possible, you basically set one of these things up. It pulls everything and sends everything outside. So if things were to get disturbed, it's not going into other rooms. You're supposed to put negative pressure on the room, technically. Um, and really, it's glorified demolition, cleaning, and painting. This was an office space storage for an office above, and there was mold growth on there. It was not really well maintained for moisture, even though there were poured foundation walls. And you basically had to clean everything, remove the insulation, and you kind of spray it. This window right here was leaking, right? So it's in someone's room. You're setting up the containment. That's the area after the fact. There was leakage from the overhang for the bay window that was coming in and causing that. But if you can't rip all that stuff out and not have containment. So it might take you 2 hours to set up this silly bubble boy containment, but that's how you're supposed to do it. Technically, you're supposed to go around and vacuum this stuff off. And it's kind of cool. It comes right off. Looks, sometimes it's still stained, but looks kind of cool. Uh, you might have a wall in a basement and you're going to cut out one side of it so you can clean the inside and then treat the other. You're going to go into basements and see a wall like that. 100% that was mold remediation, or they had a flood and they dried it out within several days, like 3 days. Mold takes like 3 days to grow. They cleaned it up. Maybe mold didn't grow, but the sheetrock just kind of got messed up. This was a house that was flipped. Woman bought it. She's on her exercise bike. She's getting sick. We do it testing. Turns out there was mold there, and there was actually a crack in the foundation. Right. This photo is actually out of order. The bay window I showed you, that was the mold that was in the bay window because the water was coming from above because how the bay window was attached to the house, water was getting in. Right. When you do mold remediation, one of the things you're supposed to do is remove the mold. You may not get everything, which is why you kind of air filter it, but you also spray like fungicides to kill any residual spores so they will not grow. Okay. So this is an attic before, right? And you're like, oh my God, that the wood is destroyed. Let me tell you, you take a long screwdriver and hit it, it's rock solid. That's what it looks like afterwards, right? Same thing with an attic there, right? And there's not really a before picture on that. And how that's treated is you're not brushing it. You're basically going in there with an airless sprayer and you're spraying all the wood. And that's how it looks. Again, not really sexy photos, but it will signify to you that you're seeing a house, be like, who did this? Because you want to get the paperwork. And I'm going to tell you why in a minute, right? Another roof. A lot of people like kills, right? Mold, it's really technically a primer. And they actually sell it in cans. A priest bought a house with those. That's what was in the crawl space of the house. He was getting musty odors. There's mold growing on it, right? If you look at kills, it's designed to prevent mold and mildew. It's designed to be applied directly to mold and mildew prone surfaces. But they're saying that to prep the area, and you can look at their website, you have to wash the area with a mildew remover, rinse with water, and allow to dry. No one's doing that in a basement crawl space or attic. Okay. It gives you a lifetime warranty. Masterchem is who owns this, right? But this warranty is not transferable. So I could use kills to clean up my mold and I sell it to you. You're the new owner, no warranty. So I see a lot of companies, they offer like a 1 year warranty. There's two companies, Foster's and Fiberlock, that make these coatings. It's a high-end paint, but it's a coating and it inhibits mold growth. There's additives to it that have been tested with the EPA to inhibit mold from growing in the future, right? Can you eliminate mold using bleach? The EPA will say not really. Here's something funny about bleach you don't know, right? It's good for about 6 months from when it's made. That's when it's strongest. It'll always have that chlorine odor, okay? But over time it breaks down and it's just not as effective. And the bleach that you get, not going to burn you. It's mostly water. Okay, so as you're spraying this, it's definitely going to kill mold spores because it is a fungicide, but it's also mostly moisture which you're leaving in the environment. And remediation is not killing it, it's removing it. All right, so you technically have to go in with a HEPA vac and clean it, and when you're done everything is when you kind of spray a fungicide in case you missed little pockets here and there. Kind of some facts to know about mold, which I told you earlier is any mold problem is a moisture problem. I guarantee that's going to make a buyer feel better. Okay. Seller's not going to be happy pretty much no matter what. Okay. Except you can tell them that if this party walks away, we should disclose this because it's an issue. It's not like someone said your kitchen cabinets are ugly. Like you're basically saying that we found mold, which is a biological hazard. It's a known indoor air contaminant. You sell to somebody, they move in, they're having a health issue, they get some mold testing done, finds out there's a mold issue, get an attorney involved, the attorney finds out it was under contract, subpoenas the realtor for the buyer previously and said, yeah, it was a mold issue. Then the environmental company gets subpoenaed. And they basically said, so everyone knew there was a mold issue, but it wasn't disclosed. And there's court cases where not disclosing something can be viewed as being fraudulent. Okay. Couple things that you should know. There's no federal standards. Okay. You go to the doctor and get your blood work done. There's kind of standards, what they're looking for your age and everything. There's no standards for mold testing. So someone could test some mold and say, guess what? It's either mold or it's not mold, right? So if it is mold, that's an issue. Now you do some air testing. It's like there's no standards where the government's going to tell you this is a bad level, this is a good level. Okay. I see no regulations really on the horizon for either New Jersey or Pennsylvania or Delaware regarding regulations pertaining to mold licensing. And I say this because you're licensed. You take continuing education classes because you need that for your license. Okay. Plumbers, electricians, all have these licenses, right? People who do mold work, and Curren Environmental included, myself included, okay? I don't have a license for it because there's no license offered in the states that I have. I have multiple other licenses, right? Well, when you have something that the government gives you as a license, it's valuable. You don't want to lose it. You do something wrong, it could be taken away. One of the issues with mold is I see people like, oh, I'm licensed. I'm like, by the Wile Coyote School of Acme Mold, like there is no licensing. Okay. Again, when I tell you there's only a handful of states that have licensing, it's completely true. I show you this photo again because this was new construction, and you can see where the mold is very selectively growing on this. And I'm showing you this other photo, right? Because new construction, well, you probably would not have a client buying new construction because unless they're contracting it, I mean, we get involved with it, but I showed you this photo earlier. That's what these areas look like. They look like little stalactites coming in, right? Now, I say this to you because I guess where you could pull this from, if you're selling a house or buying a house and there's a finished basement, in my heart, I feel like if the people have lived there for a long time and the basement's been finished, it's probably been dry. Okay. But if you have like a flipper or someone who's redid the space, I would be concerned, okay? Because those people just see the space as, let me finish it on the cheap, make it nice, not knowing that it does get wet, okay? I would highly recommend getting inspections and testing done when you have basement spaces that are finished. Because even if that basement looks dry and it's got two sub pumps, you lose power, those sub pumps don't work. And sometimes when you lose power, it's not for hours, it could be for a day, and the water can build up and it can spread across the whole area. That's a basement. You can tell it's a basement because if you look to the left, the gray right there you see, that is a center beam to the house. Okay. That is a basement because it was moist down there. Now you get a flipper or someone who looks at that, doesn't even see it, and they are sheetrock over it, right? And it's there. Maybe the basement's dry, but it wasn't dry at that point in time. So sometimes a driver for I guess a mold inspection would be if you have finished spaces that are subterranean because they're just more likely, higher probability of having some sort of moisture issue. And let me tell you, a way to get out of some of this, and I'm a little obnoxious because I do a lot of due diligence. I'd like to see home inspection of when the people, bought the house. Because you'll find that there's issues they never addressed or they did address. Um, I just show that to you. This is new home mold remediation, right? It looks crazy. And the issue with this was they were already putting like wood flooring down in some areas, like on the stairs, and the windows were up, and you had the airless spray. We had to do that all by hand. It was really a pain in the butt because the airless spray would have got it everywhere. Regarding mold on a level playing field, okay, your seller finds it, hears about it, and doesn't want to do anything. Okay. It's obviously a concern to the buyer, okay? But the buyer may have some other concerns. I'm not a realtor, but it seems like you do a lot of negotiating. And it's like, what can we do to get you to the table? I've never had a property that had a mold problem that I would say don't buy it. Okay. But it's like, what would it take you to buy it? What would it take to address it? Because they might be like, give me a concession or I want this addressed, and it might be the basement has mold in it, and they're like, we're going to gut it anyway because it's ugly, right? Um, it really helps to try to get a cost because at least now you're looking at something and be like, there's a judge because you might be like, I'm going to give you X amount of dollars. Well, what is that based on? I will tell you, if mortgage or insurance companies find out about it, a lot of times it triggers they're going to want to get something done because they're afraid the house could be uninhabitable. Okay. And there's people who move out of homes. Well, actually, we just did a peer review on a report out of Australia where the tenant had moved out and was sleeping on the deck because they thought the house had so much mold in it. So I said this to you earlier. Explaining how the cause of the mold is helpful to make sure that it's fixed. That's not going to come back, and now you just have to address it. If it's not fixed, it's a matter of fixing it and then addressing the mold. Hey, guess what? You made it through this class, right? Felt like 6 hours, didn't it? Hopefully you learned something. Are there any questions that we did not answer?
I have a question.
Hopefully I have an answer.
Can you hear me? Yeah, sure.
I can hear
Is
you.
there an optimal percent humidity to set your basement dehumidifier on?
I like 55.
Okay.
Okay. But if you have a large basement, you may need two. You have multiple rooms, right?
Yeah.
And if you have a dehumidifier and the room is like this foam, you kind of want to cock it a little bit so it exhausts, so it blows air around the room.
Yeah.
Okay. And I like dehumidifiers that you can run a hose to and it goes into a sink or a sub pump,
Right.
or even the evacuation pump for the HVAC, so you don't have to empty it.
Right.
Otherwise, I go to a lot of basements and the dehumidifiers are full because they did a great job, but you forget to empty it because you have to do that every day
Right.
in the season.
We had ours put right into the sewer line. They just cut a hole in the sewer line and connected it.
It's a little sensitive. You got to make sure that's in there and it's not under pressure.
Yeah, yeah. All right.
But yeah, but this way you don't have to do it, right? And those are the ones I like to see. But really, once you install a dehumidifier, you should always put the date down because they last about 7 years and they will still run and make a noise, but they don't suck any water. And you're fooled into thinking that they're actually working. But you have to take out the filter because it picks up all the dust in the air and it does get disgusting. I tell people when you pay your quarterly taxes, check the filter on your HVAC, which should have a date on it. So most of them you should change every 3 months, and you should take the screen out of the dehumidifier, take it to the sink, and wash all that dust off.
Excellent. Thank you.
I have another question. We have a seller who had a pipe burst in the kitchen and there was mold, but the whole place has been totally remediated. It's ready to go. And I suggested that she have it retested. And she said, no, because not everyone's allergic to mold, and let the buyer do that if they want to do it in their inspection. What is your thought on that?
I would get a copy of the testing data and give it to the buyer.
But she didn't have it retested, only before the remediation.
Okay.
I know.
I guess, well, first of all, when you have a leak, was it a sudden pipe burst or there was
Pipe burst, it destroyed the first floor and the basement. And so the place was gutted, re-sheet rocked, and, obviously the pipe was fixed. So that's all done and remediated, repainted, everything's, brand new floors.
Part of me says you're probably good because it was a sudden, okay? So you addressed everything and there probably wasn't a whole lot of time for the mold to grow, okay? I'd be curious to see what the mold test result was originally because it has to be wet for several days for it to grow. you know, but if they're gutting everything, you're removing everything. I'm more concerned about a long-term water issue because you just don't know how long that has spread and what that has impacted.
Okay, so
And quite
then,
frankly, in all seriousness, if you test something, you're going to get a result. It's going to be good or bad. If you don't test, you don't get any result. You know, and it's obviously, you know, you should disclose this. And if the buyer wants to do it, you'd wind up doing probably an air test in the kitchen and probably one below it, so you can see what the fungal ecology is. And cross your fingers, nothing comes up. But
yeah,
it's
I
probably an
know.
insurance claim.
She did it. It's always through insurance.
Yeah, they probably did a pretty good job.
Okay.
You know, I'm more concerned about flippers and DIYers. They tend to screw it up.
Yeah, I know. I kept saying through your whole thing, don't buy a flip.
Let me tell you, when you buy a
Do a
flip,
flip.
when you live through construction, it's a nightmare, and especially a kitchen. You're living off a hot pot and a
Yeah.
toaster oven. So, I mean, there is some value to it, but they do tend to cut corners, you know?
You do. All right. Well, thank you for your help.
Sure thing.
There's a question from John. Suchi, John, do you want to unmute yourself and ask it, or?
Hello.
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I typed in that I've come across mold in homes that are heated by propane hot air. Seems to be a problem. Seems to be laden with moisture. One
Yep.
house had to have a whole house dehumidifier installed to eliminate the problem of mold growing on drywall. Have you
Yep.
come across that before?
I have, yeah. Yeah.
So that's
I-
the only
It's look,
way to
when
combat
you
it, I guess.
cook, when you cook, you release moisture. If we were all in a classroom together releasing moisture, propane has it in there and you're going to get that. But it's probably a pretty airtight house for it to hold that moisture.
Yep.
You know, look, I have people in West Virginia, they run dehumidifiers all year round because in the summertime, like in their living room, it gets moist and they have mold growing on things. You know, and the way I work with, I tell people set the dehumidifier to 55. It's very comfortable. You set it to 40, it's running a marathon. You set it to 55, guess what? If it's above 55, it turns on. If it's below 55, it doesn't turn on. It's like your gauge. It's unusual to have a dehumidifier in people's living spaces, but propane is one of those things. Yeah. Sorry.
Yep.
So
Thanks.
not isolated. Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. So, well, thank you so much, David. This was really informative, great information for everyone. As a reminder, it was recorded and everyone, all members will receive a copy next week. And we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to teach our members, David. Thank you.
Right. The Eagles want me in their parade over the weekend. So totally. Yeah. I'm glad we got this out of the way. Yeah.
I know David and I spoke last week and we were like, oh, if there's a parade on Thursday, we're gonna have to postpone this because,
Totally. Yes.
but yeah, luckily it's tomorrow. So anyway, thank you so much. We really appreciate your
Sure
time.
thing. Good talking to everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.